Something we hear a lot from people considering moving to Portugal or anywhere in Europe is they want to live without a car. Europeans all live without a car. They do when they're young and healthy. Everything in Europe and Portugal is cobblestones. It's treacherous to walk on. I've fallen. Most of our friends have fallen. So for retirees especially, if you have any kind of mobility issues, don't plan to live without a car. Our whole crazy story, I grew up in New Jersey, got married and pregnant very early, which is what people did back in that day. Was unhappy for many years, but couldn't afford to leave him and raise my daughter on my own. So Clyde says my ex-husband was nice enough to bring me to Texas so I could divorce him and meet Clyde and run away with him. So we were in southern Texas, Corpus Christi, with my ex. We were looking to make friends. We, got online and tried to make other friends, couples, make other couple friends. And we met Clyde and his wife at the time. Immediately fell in love with Clyde. We saw the other two connecting. We left them and got married, and they are now married together. So that's our crazy story.
And I had been married 28 years, and she'd been married 23 years. And when we met each other, it was a matter of 3 months. And we just looked at each other and said, what the heck are we doing? And we walked out. So it was a very big move, very big move.
Now, another thing, at the time we met, we were both fat. I was about 275 pounds, and I'm 5'3". You weighed about the same, but You're 6'1". I'd lost 100 pounds twice before. I mean, most Americans are obese. It's not uncommon there. Could never keep it off. He said I married him because he had good health insurance. And I had gastric bypass surgery 20 years ago, lost 150 pounds, and have kept the weight off. So, that was another part of our story. So over the years when we've had to face our exes, it's like, okay, here I am now. I lost the weight. I've had some plastic surgery. I nip and tuck everything. And then with our story about leaving for Panama, we had never been out of the States before. We started traveling.
Well, let's back up. I was a firefighter paramedic and for 27 years and volunteered for 3 years. And I got injured on the job. I hurt my neck and had to retire. There's no way I could retire off my pension. I did get a firefighter pension, but I was 57, so I didn't get any Social Security. And started doing some research and realized that if we moved out of the country, I could retire on part of my pension. So at that time, we decided to go to Panama.
Mm-hmm. I was 51. He was 57. People said, you're too young to retire. How could you do this? And, we had a good life. We were living on about $2,000 a month, which wasn't much. But he did get a settlement from the fire department that kind of helped start our lives in Panama. And we bought a house that defrayed our expenses because we weren't paying rent like we are now.
Mm-hmm.
And then we took our first ever trip to Europe and wanted to live somewhere else and didn't know how we could travel more or live somewhere else on the small amount of money we had. Somebody suggested we try house and pet sitting. So since then, we've done house sits all over the world where we're living free in someone else's house. And people started to think we came into money. We were rich. How could these people be doing this? And we told people, no, we don't own anything, which is not the American way. The American way is to have bigger, better houses and cars and be in debt and live from one paycheck to another. So we suddenly didn't have debt. We were living in other people's homes and we could afford to travel more.
Yeah.
And that was kind of how we discovered Portugal as a place to live next.
So when we left Panama, we were able to sell our house, fully furnished, and the people were coming from the United States. So included in the purchase of the house, they got all of our furniture, our towels, our dishes, and they even adopted our dog. So it was a kind of an easy move. We didn't have to get rid of anything. We just cleaned the house and they moved in.
Wasn't easy for me downsizing and getting rid of the clothes and the shoes, being a woman. I cried a lot.
Yeah.
But I wanted to travel bad enough that I was willing to give it all up and do it. We left with 2 carry-on size suitcases. And, in our travels, Clyde might say to me, let's get dressed up and go out to dinner tonight. I'm like, dressed up? I don't have any dress up clothes anymore. So it was definitely a different way of life. I'm a bit of a germaphobe. I didn't like other people's germs. I had never even had animals as a child because I was raised by a germophobic mother. I thought, I don't know if I
Well,
could be around dogs and cats. And
we did have two
yeah,
Doberman Pinschers in Panama.
those were my first dogs ever.
Yeah.
So I got to like dogs. We've done cat sits. I've had some allergies with cats, so we stopped doing cat sits. But I really did come to love the animals.
So let's talk about the house sitting. When we were still in Panama, we wanted to try it before we jumped into it completely. So we did a month in Mexico, Ajijic, a month in Costa Rica, and then a month in Ecuador. And then that's when we decided, hey, we could do this. And here again, it was a big step. Part of our life, our new life, and it's in her book, is you have to say yes. You just have to say, yeah, I could do that. And that's a scary thing. And I still have problems with it because she'll come up and say, oh, I found a house sit. My immediate thought was, oh, we can't do this. We can't afford this. We can't do the time. Then I step back and say, sure, let's do it. So that was a key to our success, was saying yes. Of course, we started that when we ran away from the other two. We said yes. Let's just get out of here.
So many people stay in unhappy relationships because they're afraid to make a move. And it's not easy and it is scary. And he didn't have a lot to offer at the time, but I was madly in love and it worked out. And I was giving up what I knew I had, a house and a stable situation. It wasn't wonderful, but it wasn't horrible either with my ex. But I wanted romance. I wanted more.
When she said I didn't have a lot to offer, I was in debt financially. My dear ex-wife had lost like 3 jobs within a year, and we had just lost our house, and we were just a mess financially. That's what she meant. I didn't have a lot to offer, because I did have a lot to offer.
Had a lot of love to offer.
Yeah.
And sometimes love conquers all and takes over. So when we would tell people our crazy story, they'd say, you got to write a book. You got to write a book. So that's what I did. I always wrote well, but I never really pursued it too much as a kid. I spent a year in college studying journalism, didn't really like journalistic writing. And it wasn't until we retired and moved to Panama that we had been following a publication, a company called International Living. I don't know if you've heard of them. They sell the dream to North Americans of moving abroad and having a better life somewhere else. So once we moved to Panama, I wrote our story and I said, oh, I'm going to submit this to International Living because we read a lot of their stuff about moving to Panama. And all of a sudden I get an email saying, we're going to publish your article. And they liked me and they kept asking for more. And I went on to speak at their Panama conferences. Once they found out I was house sitting, we started writing about our travels. They found out we were living in Portugal and I was their Portugal correspondent for a while. So I've had a long past with them. So my writing got a lot of practice over the years. So writing a book was not the hard part. It was marketing the book and getting it out there, hoping to be a millionaire from it, but that's not going to happen, I think.
Everyone has $1 million idea, but it's the fact is getting it out there. And just since you've mentioned this book a few times, I'm just going to let the audience know the title, which is Rescued and Transformed. Find out how I lost half my body weight, retired early to Panama, traveled the world inexpensively, and now live in Portugal, which is the full title for the listening audience that can see the book that Terry's holding.
Yeah. So let's talk about our house sitting. Let people know how we did it and some of the ins and outs and where we've been. And first of all, we had to join some websites. And at the time when we were full-time house sitters, for 2 years. We belonged to maybe 5 or 6 different websites. Mm-hmm. The big one is trustedhousesitters.com.
They all do require money. You have to pay to get on. You set up a profile. Our profile said retired firefighter, paramedic, and his wife want to travel the world, one house sit at a time. So firefighter, paramedic, That speaks that we're responsible. We're retired, so we have time. We don't have to get back to kids or work. And then we put our information about home ownership and how our pet qualifications and experience. He had more of it than I did. But as we started to get a few sits, then we got references because people would write a reference on us. And so that helped us get the next sit. And now that we're living in Europe, it's easy to get a European sit. We spent 2 months in Paris last summer, not this summer, the summer before. Hi from Portugal. We can be there on a 2-hour flight. We'd love to do the sit.
Yeah.
We were in Vienna last Christmas for a month with one dog for Christmas and New Year's. So.
But let's go back to the beginning when we left Panama. And like I said, we were doing it full time for 2 years. And our first sit, believe it or not, was in Thailand. There again, you have to say yes. Who jumps on a plane and goes to Thailand to take care of somebody's cat for a month?
Well, I didn't realize how long of a flight. I didn't realize how long of a flight from the U.S. Bangkok was. We went back to the U.S. to see our kids before we went to Bangkok. Mm-hmm. Then I realized it was 20 hours of airtime, and then, okay, it's not going to be fun. So we arrived. We met the homeowners. The sit was at the end of the month. You can go to Bangkok Thailand at the time for 30 days without a visa. So we met the owner, spent the night, and then we traveled the rest of the country before coming back for the sit, and it was a cat sit. Right before we came back, they emailed me and said, we're canceling the sit because the cat was diagnosed with cancer and we've canceled our vacation. I mean, this is a nightmare for house sitters. And they said, but we'll take care of you wherever you want to go. We'll pay for a hotel or apartment for the next 2 weeks, wherever you'd like to be. So that was great. So after we explored the rest of Thailand, I get on flights are the most expensive thing. So I was always online going, okay, what can we see in this part of the country, in this part of the world, because we're probably not coming back here. Hong Kong was close. We went to Hong Kong for a few days. We had friends from Texas that were living in China at the time. We did another trip to Cambodia. Wherever we are, I'm always conscious of what else can we see around this part of the world while we're here.
Yeah. So it wasn't dirt cheap to do what we did. We still had expenses. We still had to have flights, our food, and health insurance. But we were living in somebody's house for free. Some of them would loan us their car, but most of the time I would rent a car just to see the area. Why go to, a little village in Italy if you can't explore around?
Some of these were $1 million, $2 million houses. Others were small flats in the middle of a city that weren't too clean, but we would make the best of it.
Mm-hmm. But realistically, and she was in charge of finding the sits and applying for the sits because she's a good writer and she knows how to ask for the sits. And I was doing logistics. I'd arrange the flights and if we had a hotel or rental cars and just organize everything, just get there. But during the 2 years, and we don't have an exact number, but I think we probably did about 25 sits.
More than that. It's more in the range of 35, 40, I believe.
Wow.
We had a sit in a resort in Egypt called El Guna. Not real Egypt, but we lived free in this $1 million house with a pool on the Red Sea. It was such a nice sit. We went back and did it the following year. And they've now moved back to the UK, so we'll be going back there. But because we're in Egypt already, we did the touristy parts of Egypt. We went to the pyramids. We did a Nile cruise. I mean, Egypt is a very affordable location anyway, where you can eat out for the equivalent of $2. We had another stint in Kenya. So wow, we're going to Kenya. What's the thing to do in Kenya? Let's do a safari. I've always wanted to do an African safari, but it's very expensive to fly there just for a safari.
Yeah.
So because we lived free in this house for 6 weeks, we could afford the safari.
Right. And that was our mantra. Even though we were living for free, we still wanted to explore the areas and historic sites, things like that.
And after we applied for the sit, we would always meet the people like this and do a video chat. And one of the questions we always asked is, can we leave the animals and for how long? Some people say, I want you to stay with my dog or cat the whole time. You're not allowed to leave the pet at all. Well, what's the point of doing that? So we don't take those sits. As long as we can leave the animal for 4 or 5 hours and go out and explore and come back and be with the animals again, we're good with that.
And one of the reasons we've been so successful at this and have 5-star reviews is, number one, we're honest. And number two, we do, like she said, we do this interview and we understand what they want and they understand what we can do. And if they say you can leave for 6 hours, well, we only leave for 6 hours. We do what we say we're going to do. And the animals, of course, are the primary focus. They're the reason that we're there. And they're the reason we're living free. So we're very caring for the animals. And then the next thing is we leave each house cleaner than when we found it. And if you tell somebody that, they don't like that. They say, well, we have a clean house. How could you leave it cleaner? But we do.
Because we don't go out exploring every day, so we have downtime where we're just sitting in the house. If I open the oven and it's dirty, I'll scrub the oven or the shower or something that may have been neglected because they were too busy to do it. I also don't want a homeowner to come back. Once we leave our house, we don't realize that we leave dirt behind. You go away for a month and you come back home and you say, oh, I didn't realize the kitchen cabinets had fingerprints on. So it's things like that I would look at, being a bit of a germaphobe, and clean everything and try to leave a good impression. And we always do.
Yeah. So she mentioned the big sits as far as Egypt, Kenya, my God, and Thailand. I mean, that's a big deal. But we also had sits all through Europe, all through the UK, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Spain, France.
And the nice thing about house sitting is because we're living in a real house in a real neighborhood, we're not in a 5-star hotel just seeing the tourist places. Most people go to the UK and they see London. They don't see all of these nice little towns. So we've stayed in all these little towns and villages and are experiencing real life. Another thing that's mentioned in the book about saying yes to things. We were house sitting in, when did the Panama Canal thing come up? I was blogging all the years we lived in Panama.
We were still in Panama.
Yeah. I was writing a blog called Along the Gringo Trail at Blogspot, thinking that our friends and kids back home could follow it. Well, it developed quite a following of people interested in moving to Panama. A couple from Australia were coming through the Panama Canal on a 42-foot catamaran. So Clyde started chatting with this couple and invited us to go along with them. So we went through the Panama Canal 3 days on a private yacht with 4 people that we never met before because we were crazy enough to say yes. And it was an amazing experience. Another thing that he liked.
I want to tell them this
story. Tell your other story?
Yeah. I love to tell this story because it's unbelievable. We were in the UK, I can't remember where, and I got a message on Facebook from a Facebook friend that I'd never met. And she was a friend of a friend in Panama. And so she says, Clyde, she said, I see you're here. Believe it or not, I'm like 15 minutes away from you. And I told her, I says, well, we need to get together for coffee or something. And she says, well, I can do you one better. She said, I'm working here now and I work for Checkers. Well, as Americans, we don't know what Checkers is. I think there's a restaurant called Checkers in the United States. Checkers is the Prime Minister's weekend vacation home.
In England.
In England.
It's never open to the public. The homeowners are looking at us, rolling their eyes.
And she said, would you like a tour of Checkers? So they had to do a background check on us. And we walked through the Prime Minister's home.
We had a 2-hour private tour that the Brits can never get into. And we tell the Brits here this story and they're like, wow, we can't get into Checkers. It's like them going into Camp David or the White House. Yeah. It's never open to the public for tours.
And every time we meet a new British person, and there's a lot of them over here, I have to brag on that story.
So I think a lot of things in our life happen because we were crazy enough to say, okay, I'll do that. And you have to be to move abroad. It's not for everyone.
And those 2 examples she gave is another saying of ours. If you don't ask, the answer is no. Many of us want to ask, and when we don't ask, well, we don't get to do it because the answer is no. Mm-hmm. And if we're crazy enough to ask, like when we came through the Panama Canal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I didn't ask for checkers. That came into our lap.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part was I'm friendly and I have a lot of Facebook friends.
So just to kind of summarize, so basically in 2011, you moved to Panama.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
From Texas. And
Yes.
then you were in Panama for about 5 years. That's when you figured out that you're able to do this house sitting. And then you house sat for a while, and your first destination was Mexico. And then you had a friend that did like a Mediterranean cruise. And then you got the idea of going to Europe. And then you started house sitting in Europe. You ended up in Portugal. Do you have a permanent residence in Portugal? And then you house sit to different destinations from Portugal? Is this summary of what I'm saying? Is this fairly?
Yes.
Is this kind of like the timeline? Okay.
But I would like to go backwards just a minute. We were doing a house sit in Spain, and I was sitting in front of my computer, and I fainted at the computer. I let out a yell, and I fell to the side. And she came into the room, and I came to her. I said, I'm fine, I'm fine. Well, she said, no, you're not fine. I'm going to take you to the hospital. So we were in the countryside in Spain, house sitting these dogs, which were outside dogs. So we made some quick arrangements for the neighbors to check on the dogs. We drove to the hospital. I was feeling fine. They took my pulse. I was okay. And within 10 minutes of being in the hospital, my pulse dropped to 15. And they said, well, you're getting a pacemaker. So here we are in Spain, and I'm in ICU for a week getting a pacemaker. That is the reason we decided to kind of slow down, and not really slow down, but have a home base. And at the time, we had a travel insurance policy that was high deductible. I mean, the pacemaker cost.
Well, in Spain, they told us the pacemaker alone was 12,000 euros. Our deductible was $3,100.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to pay that. They covered the rest. They actually gave me an empty room in an empty wing of a hospital because he was in ICU and I could only see him for a couple hours a day.
We came to Portugal on a sit, and there again, somebody got in touch with me. They were Americans living there, and on my Facebook. We talked to them, and they discussed that Portugal is one of the easiest countries in the EU to get residency in. So we decided to come to Portugal, settle down, and I was lucky enough to get an insurance policy that covered my pre-existing conditions of pacemaker and other. So yes, we've been here 5 years.
It'll be 6 years in August we've been here.
Yeah.
I wanted to stay nomadic, but it did have its problems when you get sick along the way and where do you go in between sits? And it wasn't a perfect lifestyle, but it was fun and exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But he promised me we could still travel from here. And then within a year or so of settling here, we came here in 2018, COVID happened. And we were thankful we had a home base when COVID happened because, the world went crazy, as you know.
I just wanted to explain how we ended up in Portugal and why we stopped the full-time house.
And that was why I didn't really like Portugal the first time I saw it. I certainly didn't want to learn Portuguese. Spanish was bad enough. I didn't want to learn another language. But we do speak Portuguese now. Yeah. We're still working on it.
And we love Portugal.
Yeah.
And we soon discovered that Portugal is the hidden gem. Because you always hear about Spain, you always hear about France. When you're in the United States, we never heard anything great about Portugal. But once we got over here and started exploring, history is incredible. For instance, Lisbon is the oldest city in Western Europe. Anyway, I'm sorry, you were summarizing.
So, basically, you've been in Portugal since 2018 as this primary residence.
Yeah.
Whenever you look at top 10 cheapest places for expats to retire, Panama is always in there, which you live there. Portugal is always in there. Spain's in there. So what's the price difference between living in Portugal versus living in the U.S.? And then secondly, how often are you actually doing one of these sits? How often are you in Portugal? And then how often are you out in Thailand or Kenya or one of these countries that you're pet sitting?
Well, as part of our visa here, we have to remain in the country for so many months out of every year. At this point, we've exhausted our time out, so we're not leaving until we We renew our visa again in June. And at that point, we will ask for permanent residency. The option beyond that is to ask for citizenship, which we could get a passport with. We could actually vote here. Not sure if we're going to do that because of the taxation issues. Our tax guy told us it would be better to just be permanent residents. Now, once we become permanent residents, and you do have to have the language requirement, we have to have a certificate from a government institution saying we're at least an A2 level of Portuguese. We're at a B2 level right now, so we're fine on that. But the permanent residency will allow us about 6 months out of the country every year, and then we can resume our travels.
Yeah.
So right now, because we have a home base, I look for good house sits. If I see one with a dog in a very nice apartment and it says, come explore Vienna for Christmas, I go, okay, that means we can leave the dog and go out of the house. So when a nice sit comes up like that, I take them. As far as the cost of living, it depends where you live in the U.S. I mean, if somebody moves here from L.A. or New York City, it's probably cheap. If you move here from small town America, it's probably expensive.
Yeah. We lived in South Texas, and even though things got expensive there, South Texas is still a cheaper part of the United States. It's a lower paying and expenses are low there. So my pension is not huge. My savings were not huge. So,
I think we're living at about $3,000 a month.
But we're paying rent here.
Yeah, our rent is $1,200.
Yeah.
Our first rent was €350, but it was an old, cold apartment with no heat. And then we upgraded. We moved to the south. We're in the south of Portugal now.
Mm-hmm.
It went to $850, and now we're at $1,200. But it's a spacious apartment. It's furnished. It's all new.
And it's warm.
It's warm.
And we have to mention that it doesn't get that cold in Portugal, but the houses, if you're in an old house, it's colder inside the house than it is outside. So one must rent or buy a modern house with double pane windows and good heat.
And Panama ruined us. You get used to living in 85, 90 degree temperatures without air conditioning. And anywhere you go after that, you're freezing.
Yeah. Has nothing to do with our age.
You met my parents in Panama, is that right? I think everyone kind of has a different strategy. My parents wanted to go to Panama. They've been there for like 20 years at this point now because Florida wasn't hot enough for them. There's really no perfect path, but what are some of the positives of Panama, the positives of Europe, some of the other places you've lived? You must get asked all the time by other people that are retiring, like, where should I go?
For us, when the residency process was easier in Portugal, they're all a pain in the ass. One doesn't just jump on the plane and move somewhere. You have to have residency in these countries. But you also have to think about not only cost, but is there decent health care and is the infrastructure decent? For instance, when we were in Panama, we always felt safe there. There was a little minor crime, but the water would be off or the electricity would be off, and you kind of get used to that. And so their infrastructure is a little lower than you would find in the United States. The infrastructure here, no, it's not exactly up to U.S. standards, but it's still very good. And what people don't understand about Europe, they don't tear down old buildings. Old buildings are all here. You could be in a neighborhood and there's buildings hundreds of years old down the street from you, The United States tends to tear down things and start over. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is you got to take in all those different things. And healthcare is very important at our age. I'm 69 now.
I'm 63.
Yeah.
And healthcare is very good here.
Yeah.
We had good experiences with healthcare in Panama, but in Panama City. In Coronado, around that area, there really wasn't much other than doctors.
Mm-hmm.
But for the major surgeries, you had to go into the city. And if you've driven in Panama City, or been there, the traffic is pretty bad there.
I was in Panama right before the pandemic visiting my parents when my mom fell off a ladder and had a compound fracture in San Carlos, right outside Coronado. And we went to a local doctor and they had no idea what to do. So we had to drive with a compound fracture an hour and a half to the city and wait in line and go to the window and pay the $3 to go to another window. I mean, it was a complete shit show, so to speak. So, but if you were in the city, it wouldn't have. You would have been just would have just drove right to the.
While we're talking about healthcare, most European countries offer public healthcare and private healthcare. It is a condition of our residency that we have health insurance here. We use both. We use the public for emergencies and then the private for, like my heart, or special. Terry just had a couple of.
I had cataract surgery, but I didn't have cataracts. I just wanted to get rid of wearing contact lenses.
She got lenses implanted.
And the doctor told me it was covered by health insurance. So I started wearing contact lenses at 11 years old. I was able to just throw them away. So.
And, healthcare is why we left the United States, the cost of healthcare. Because when I retired at 57 from the fire department, my health insurance was going to be $1,400 a month. And now I believe it's over $2,000 a month for that care for a 57 and a 51-year-old couple. Here we're paying about, and it sounds like a lot, we're paying $500 a month. But we have very good health insurance because I have a pacemaker, I have heart problems, and we take care of ourselves.
Clyde, you mentioned that you're 69, and Terry, you said you're 63. So once you're both 65, is there any more motivation to move back? Because then you're both going to be qualified for Medicare?
Not for us.
No.
Not for us.
He turned it down since he's been here. I'll turn it down too.
We certainly don't want to badmouth the United States, but we found our new home. We can't see going back.
At this point, the U.S. feels like a foreign country because we've been gone so long. Yeah. Your parents might feel that way too.
You've been gone since 2011. We're in, 2024? You're talking 13 years. I mean, K through 12 is 13 years, right?
Right? Wow. Never thought of it that way.
And we've been gone full time. Once we did it. We never went back.
Yeah, I think we've been back to visit 4 times in those years.
So one of the things you said earlier was that when you're pet sitting, that some people want you to spend 24 hours a day with that pet. You're not able to leave. What percentage of people are like, yeah, you need to spend the whole time with the pet, versus other people are like, yeah, I just spend, half the time. What's the breakdown? Are you turning down a lot of jobs because they have unreasonable expectations?
Yes. Well, I go into the websites and look at them. Occasionally, someone will contact us and ask us to do a sit. But usually I scroll through the sits and only apply for the ones that sound good to me. Another thing is somebody will let you take the animals out, but they want you to take, the dog maybe everywhere you go. And, we don't do that either because it's hard to do anything with an animal.
When we were doing it full time, the next place we lived depended on getting the next sit. God forbid we have to pay for a hotel. So back then, we weren't quite as choosy. If we didn't have a next sit lined up and somebody said, well, we want you to be with a dog longer than we really wanted to, well, we might have done that sit in order to have a place to live. Now, we just do sits for nice places to go. And it has to be a good location and a fair deal. That we're only going to be, not only, but that they'll let us leave for 5 or 6 hours to see the area.
We don't usually sleep with the animals either. We usually ask that. We were just in Lisbon in the summer, and I forgot to ask that. And one dog was this miniature schnauzer, and he jumped in the bed and said, "Oh, he sleeps with us?" Or, "Oh, yeah, he sleeps with us," they said. We did let him sleep with us because he was so cute and little, but we don't usually do that. We had forgot to ask.
Yeah. And as you go on, you learn about animals. When I had dogs when I was younger, even the 2 Dobermans, they weren't well trained. But I learned as a sitter that when I walked in somebody else's house, I had to become the master of that dog. That makes sense. And I did this with 2 things. I would teach the dog to walk at heel. And then the second thing was that when we gave the dog food, it was our food we were giving the dog. We'd set the food down and make the dog wait for his food. And doing those two things, we became the masters of the house, and the dogs loved us because, they're a pack mentality. And not everybody, because for instance, the house sit in Egypt, the homeowners were Brits, and they rescued 2 wild desert dogs of Egypt. The breed is called a Baladi.
They're kind of like wolves. They're big, strong animals.
And they were very strong. And they had no control over their animals. It was kind of scary. And within a few days, we had them both walking at heel, and they would listen to us. And a funny story, they called us and said their teenage son was going to come by the house. He needed to get something out of the house. So the doorbell rang, and the dog started barking, and I told him to sit. And I opened the door, and it was the young man, and he looked around me, and he said, "What the hell did you do to my dogs?" Because we had trained them. We became the masters of the house. Mm-hmm. And we're not mean. Mm-hmm. Like I told you, just teaching them how to walk properly on the leash and owning the food.
It's like having a toddler. You have to set some boundaries and, get them to listen.
So we were successful that way. Yeah. Because the dogs loved us. And more than one sit, the homeowners would come home, the dogs would run over there, get their petting, and then they'd come back and sit by us.
And often we get an email from the homeowner saying, the dog's sitting by the door, like, where are those other people?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about maybe not voting in Portugal because it affects some type of like residency status. No place getting residency is easy.
No.
I mean, kind of like what did you mean by talking about, say, voting? And what's like the process going?
We talked about getting citizenship.
Citizenship, right.
And citizenship is just a little different taxation that we're not real familiar with. And that's another thing, that when you find this lovely country you want to move to, you've got to find out about how they're going to tax you. For instance, Portugal has an agreement with the United States, so there's no double taxation. You pay taxes here first, because they're a little higher than the States, but you don't pay the taxes in the States. And the types of income we have, it's basically pensions and Social Security now, are not taxed. When we came to Portugal, the government had a deal called the NHR. What they were trying to do was get people to move to Portugal. So they offered residency tax-free for 10 years. So when we came in, we didn't have to pay taxes here. And then they switched it to
10%.
10%. And I think they might be doing away with it. So the other thing about moving to another country is checking the taxation laws.
So after the 10 years is up, we'll be taxed at what the Portuguese pay, and it could be up to like 50%. So the taxation rates could be high. Yeah. We don't make a lot of money, but
it would be 50%.
So you'd be paying 50% on your Social Security or pension.
No.
Or how? Yeah, please explain.
He said 50% for somebody that made a lot of money.
Yeah,
it's on a sliding scale.
It's on a scale, yes.
And we're not going to tell you we're tax experts, and we're not sure exactly what the taxation is going to be on Social Security. Now, my pension, which is our main source of income, and it's a disability pension, if we remain residents, we will not pay taxes on that when we get our permanent residency and the NHR is over.
If we become citizens, his pension will be taxed. Yeah. So that's why we're thinking we won't. Citizenship would give us a Portuguese passport, which would make it, we could technically live anywhere in Europe if we chose to. We don't have plans on doing that, but, it would open other doors. Now that we were struggling with Portuguese, and he said to me the other day, we're not learning another language. Promise me we're not moving to another EU country.
The financial stuff and taxes is important because oftentimes people move to these other countries as a way to live someplace cheaper. Mm-hmm. And in places can have these hidden costs or have something that you don't expect. I was watching a podcast where people were moving to Europe, and Europe has high death taxes, and so they'd move, and all of a sudden, like, the house they're going to pass on to their child or something, the government basically takes like 60% of it. But
wow.
Oftentimes, there's people that are moving here to save money. Maybe they don't actually have a house to pass on anyway. So in that case, the death taxes aren't really affecting you anyways. But these are things to keep in mind because like you could really end up hurting yourself down the road.
Yeah, definitely.
You really have to do your research. You really do. And, when we moved to Panama, we did our research there. We did our research here. And it's a lot easier to do research now. I mean, the internet was there when we moved to Panama way back. But we always laugh because movies like Under the Tuscan Sun, is that the name of it?
Yeah.
She falls in love with a house. Boom. She buys it. She's living there the next day forever. Well, that's not how it works.
Yeah. You go to Paris and fall in love with somebody and you just stay. You can't do that. It's not that easy.
It's not how it works. But that's permanent. That's when you move somewhere. The house sitting gig, when you're house sitting, you're visiting people and taking care of their animals.
Now, another thing, and you probably know this about Europe, as Americans, we can only stay in the Schengen zone, which is 27 European countries, for up to 90 days out of every 6-month period. So Portugal allows us to live here full time, but the rest of the Schengen, we still only have 90 days within. So when we house sit, we have to keep those things in mind. But okay, if we did a 2-month house sit and a 1-month house sit, we've exhausted our time in the rest of the Schengen.
And that's when we would go to Egypt to get away from the Schengen countries. The Schengen countries, it's a block of countries inside of Europe.
With open borders.
Yeah, with
so
open
when
borders.
We fly to France, there's no passport check, or Spain or anywhere else.
Right. Caveat, where we're living right now, we're 15 minutes away from Spain, driving. So oftentimes we'll go into Spain just to say we went.
We're about 2 hours from Seville, where we live now.
So basically, you're living on $3,000 a month in Portugal. How would you say that would compare to living on, or retiring, I should say, on $3,000 a month in, say, like Florida or Texas or something? I mean, even on Medicare in the U.S., isn't it only like $20,000 they cover? Then you got to pay all that stuff out of pocket. Like, it's
I
not
have
that
no
good.
idea. And that's another thing. We've been gone from the United States so long, we're out of touch with what things cost there.
We have a friend here that has a pacemaker like Clyde, and he had more serious problems than just a low heartbeat. And he had Medicare when he was living in, well, I think it was in Florida he had it in. They travel a lot. And he had the supplement, which most Americans do, and they did not cover his heart medication. So he paid hundreds of dollars extra every month for these essential medications. So these implants I just had in my eyes, our cost was about 900 euros. Somebody commented on my Facebook post about this. He paid $10,000 on top of what Medicare would cover to have his eyes done in the U.S. 10,000 versus, 1,000. So yeah, U.S. healthcare is scary. The cost of it for most people. And at least here, if we don't have health insurance, we can use the public system. It's not great, and there's long wait times, and it's, not private at all, but there's something. Unlike the U.S. where there's nothing if you don't have health insurance.
Yeah, you both mentioned that you were a little bit overweight, and then you've
No, we were a lot of bit overweight.
Right, a lot of bit. Well, I was trying to be polite, but sometimes you just got to say the truth, right, Clyde? But basically, as you mentioned the book title, Rescued and Transformed, to find out how I lost half my body weight, retired early to Panama, traveled the world inexpensively, and now live in Portugal. But you basically talk about how you lost half your body weight, aka what the title says. But do you when I lived in Europe, the food quality is just, they don't have as much processed food. You have better food. I think the portion sizes are smaller. And if you see an obese person in Europe, they're probably an American tourist.
Exactly.
And I taught English in South Korea, and if you see a fat person, they're basically a tourist. Like, you're not going to see a fat Korean. But do you find it easier to live a healthy life? Because as you get older, and you're facing mortality, you want to live. Like, you're retired, you're not working, you don't have the stress. Like, I always say, it's like with my parents, when I go to visit my parents, it's like being back in high school. They got cliques. People are breaking up. People are getting back together. Like, I'm like the most mature person in the room, and I'm the youngest person, because we're like, it's like the whole circle of life right now.
Well, when you talk about food in Europe, and this is things we didn't know when we lived in the United States, there's a lot of foods that are outlawed in Europe that they have in the United States. And something we are just learning, there's a lot of people that have problems with gluten in the United States. Well, the same flour here and same products here has no gluten. And people come over here and think they have to eat gluten-free. Well, when they eat normal here. It's gluten-free.
Yes, we do find the portions here definitely smaller. The fruit and vegetables are definitely fresher and not and better. We went vegan about 4.5, 5 years ago, and it's easy to do here. I tried it in Panama, and it wasn't easy. There wasn't the selection of fruits and vegetables there. But here they grow most of them here. They're fresh. They're delicious.
But this town we're in is called Tavira. It's on the south coast of Portugal. And they eat very little meat or pork. They eat fish.
Mediterranean diet.
It's a Mediterranean diet.
A lot of fish, olive oil, fruits and vegetables. They're not big on milk products. Even children don't grow up drinking milk, we were told. They get calcium in cheese and other products like that.
Yeah.
They drink orange juice and water. It's what kids are raised on here, not soda. Now they do have McDonald's and all of those places out here too, but
Is there an expat community by you, or are you in the local area? And then what's the difference between, say, the expat community in Panama versus what you're seeing in Portugal?
In Panama, it's a lot of Americans and Canadians coming into Panama. In Portugal and Europe, there's all kinds of expats, and we have friends let's take our Portuguese class that we go to.
we have friends from Belgium, we have friends from Italy, France, and some of them speak English and some of them don't. So if they don't speak English, Portuguese is the common language. But we have friends here from all around the world. And unlike Panama, where we stood out as the gringos that were white, here everyone fits in. They all have the same skin tones. I mean, there's Africans here, but they speak Portuguese, and some of them have lived here forever. But, we don't stand out here. When we go to the gym, we hear personal trainers speaking all kinds of languages to their clients. Because European kids come out of high school for speaking 3 languages, unlike American kids that don't. So it's very common to speak several languages for Europeans.
And I have to say, especially Portugal, they're very accepting of everyone. And whether they're the LGBTQ or whatever their races are, everybody is welcome here.
There is a large expat community in Tavira where we live. I think there's about 200 or so Americans alone before you add the Europeans.
Yeah, most of the expats here are Brits. I mean, that's, the UK.
Yeah, it makes sense. You're close. Like if you're in Costa Rica, like it's closer if you're from the US. If you're in Portugal, as if you're from the UK, I mean, yeah.
Panama didn't have nearly as many expats as we have here. We had the expat community in Coronado, but there weren't as many here. Every town, every area of Portugal has large groups of expats.
When I go visit my parents, one of the things I really noticed in San Carlos, Coronado, Panama, is that all the expats kind of find each other.
Yeah.
And so let's say you're retired in Texas, like how does that change anything? But if you move to some place and all the expat community kind of finds each other, you have instantaneous friends, instantaneous activities. How does that affect your retirement?
And what I'd like to say on that subject, one thinks that they can just move to a foreign country and be friends with everyone. Well, if you don't speak their language, it's very difficult. And so you do reach out for expats. Now here, in this part of Portugal, it is so touristy that the people are speaking English because they have to take care of the tourists.
Many of the Portuguese in this part especially do speak English.
Yeah.
They admire people like us that are speaking their language and trying. They don't all speak perfect English, and that made me realize, hey, I don't need to speak perfect Portuguese because they don't always conjugate things right in English, but we understand what they're saying.
And while we're speaking about speaking foreign languages, when we were in Panama, we took Spanish lessons and we sat down with a Panamanian woman and we had conversational language. Here, the government offers free classes. And if you can pass their class, you can apply for citizenship or the permanent residency. And the classes are very, very intense. And we spent a school year going twice a week for 3 hours a night.
For 8 months. And now we're doing the B level, which will be over in June. But it's from October to June, 2 nights a week, 5 hours a week.
And it is very difficult.
And there's no English spoken in these classes because that's not the common language. The students are from all over the world. So.
Yeah. So we're kind of proud of ourselves. Not too many expats reach the level we have. Of course, we're still ashamed of our Portuguese compared to a Portuguese person, but compared to an expat, we speak pretty darn good Portuguese.
But in Panama, most of the Panamanians did not speak English, so you really had to speak Spanish and use it every time you went out. I mean, we would still look for a doctor that spoke English when we were there, or professionals like that. But to restaurant, the banks, the grocery stores there, they didn't speak English. So.
Let's say there's a retired couple, or they're getting close to retirement, and they're thinking about doing your lifestyle. You obviously have shortcuts, hacks, tricks. What would be advice you'd give to people that are thinking of retiring in 2025 and they want to live abroad?
Well, first of all, they need to do their research and pick a place. But for God's sakes, come to that place and try to stay here a few weeks and see what it's like. And believe it or not, there are expats that have never been here. They decide they want to come here. They get on the internet, they buy a house, and they move here. Oh my gosh. You wouldn't do that in the United States. Why would you do it here?
Something we hear a lot from people considering moving to Portugal or anywhere in Europe is they want to live without a car. Europeans all live without a car. They do when they're young and healthy. Everything in Europe and Portugal is cobblestones. It's treacherous to walk on. I've fallen. Most of our friends have fallen. So for retirees especially, if you have any kind of mobility issues, don't plan to live without a car. Yes, there's buses and trains that can get you from point A to point B, but they don't get you every place. And we tell people that ask us about this, last time you went grocery shopping, how many bags did you bring home? Would you want to carry all of those? Mm-hmm. Well, no, I would just go grocery shopping every day. It's still not easy carrying bags home from the grocery store.
But to answer your question, do the research and actually come here or come to any country they're planning on moving to, because it's not the United States. And there's little things that freak people out. For instance, clothes dryers are not a thing here. We hang our clothes.
There's no processed foods. There's not much for processed foods. If you want to bake a cake, you do it from scratch. You don't buy a cake mix.
Yeah.
And that freaks the Americans out. I don't know how to cook there. There's no hamburger helper or a minute rice.
Things are different.
Yeah.
And even Panama, my gosh. Panama's still behind the times. Even though you could go to Panama and move into a very nice condominium, you still have to go shopping, and you've got to do research.
And we highly recommend renting. We know people that move here, they bought a house the first week, and they're miserable. They might not like the area, they may not like the country, they may not like the weather. The first 2 years we spent in Portugal was in a colder, rainier area, and we didn't like it, but we were renting so we could leave. But once you put money down on a house, you're kind of stuck.
There's nothing wrong with buying a house once you've tried it out.
You could say the same about the U.S., moving from one state to another. You don't know if you're going to like it initially.
Go ahead.
Americans cannot fathom renting. They've just always owned a house, and we have too. But why when you're in your elderly years?
What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned since 2011 on this journey? Related to traveling, related to your health, you both, are half the size. There's a lot of things that you've learned, but what are some of the biggest life lessons you've learned?
Well, I think something that people forget is when you do need to have a health insurance and a traveling health insurance or something, because God knows what would have happened if I wouldn't have had a health insurance policy when I had my heart problem and needed a pacemaker. Mm-hmm. I might have been thrown into a public hospital where the care wouldn't be quite what I wanted. When I got my pacemaker, I had no choice. They bought a Cadillac, a very good pacemaker, right. Top of the line pacemaker. They didn't buy XXX or XXX pacemaker. They bought one of the better ones. So any travel, you need health insurance, especially overseas. And
one thing is, just because something's different doesn't mean it's wrong. The whole world doesn't do everything like the U.S. does, like the processed foods, like the clothes dryers that are not common here. The Americans freak out because there's no window screens here. Well, the bugs come in. Well, yeah, they do. Close the windows when it gets dark. All of Europe doesn't have screens. You can have them installed. They are here. They are available.
But it's not a normal
But
thing.
it's not a normal thing. They like to hang out the window. That's the neighborhood watch system. You know, grandma opens the shutters and hangs out the window.
And that's another deal in Portugal. Every house has shutters. And there was some new expat that came in. We've been kind of helping out. And he says, well, I went by your house and all your shutters were down. I thought you'd left town. I go, no, we close them every night to keep in the temperature.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what she just said is it's not wrong because it's different.
Mm-hmm.
What do you miss most about not living in the U.S.?
Not much. We've been gone so long. You know, people say, don't we have kids? I have a daughter and a grandson. He has a daughter and son.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we didn't see them much when we lived there. They're adults. They have their own lives. You know, we can text them. We can Facebook them.
And it's kind of like moving across the country in the United States. We've lived in different parts of the United States. Like she said, she grew up in Jersey and then ended up in Texas. Well, you know, 10 years later, what do you miss about Jersey? Well, I don't know. That was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And no matter how much research you'll do, there will be some surprises. Like when you walk in a bathroom in Portugal or most of Europe, there's a bidet. Americans don't even know what a bidet is.
I get asked by a lot of American women, do you use it and how do you use it? Which way do you sit? You can Google things like that.
This has been such a journey for you. Did you ever imagine you'd be living this kind of lifestyle? You go from Corpus Christi, and it's just amazing. Like, you both are married, you see each other, and then both couples switch couples, and then you lose half the size. One of the biggest things I always think is people just don't think big enough. People, you know, like, oh, I could never live that lifestyle. Well, why not? Like, you're limiting yourself. But like, I mean, I guess I'm rambling, but you understand what I'm saying.
No. And we're still amazed. We never left the United States. Living in Texas, I went to Mexico a few times, and you were in Canada a few times. But other than that, we never left the States. We had no idea what it was like. And when we moved to Panama, we flew there. I rented a car, and I drove the whole country over a week. We were nuts. And when people say, you rented a car and drove off through Panama and all the back roads and all the little villages? Yeah.
No, there's one of my high school teachers is on my Facebook, and she said to me one day, "Do you know in high school where your life was going to take you, the places you'd live?" I said, "Absolutely not. I thought I'd be a reporter and work for the New York Times and stay there." And most of my high school friends are still around Jersey City, New Jersey, which is where I grew up. They can't fathom doing anything like this, and I couldn't either. No, and that's why I tell people when I tell them that in the book, you know, if I died tomorrow, I've had a wonderful life. You know, it's been a great ride, especially the past 20 years with him and the crazy things we've done together. Just because we had the guts to say, yes, we'll do it. People say when you travel, how do you deal with the language? Like, well, you make do, you know, you Google Translate, you sign language.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I interrupted you. Sorry.
Oh, and that's one crazy thing. Shopping. You know, we'd go in grocery stores. Well, what was some of the worst ones?
Oh, I think Egypt was some of the worst. You know, it's in Arabic. You're picking it up. I don't know what that is. Okay, this looks like pasta. I'll take that. Or Thailand, you know.
We survived.
As people get older, obviously they're concerned about health, and it's the blue zones where you have these pockets in the world where people live to be a century, 100 plus, and you got Loma Linda, California with Seventh-day Adventist. Do you feel like being in Portugal, you're in one of these pockets, and what are the things that they do that we don't necessarily do in the U.S.?
I will say this, you know, they eat a Mediterranean diet here, you know, like she told you, the fish, the olive oil, blah, blah, blah. But people eat to live here and not live to eat. And we can certainly talk about this because we were both food addicts for most of our lives, and we lived to eat. And I remember going to the Mexican food restaurants in Corpus Christi and sitting down and looking for the plate with the most food I could buy for the money. That's what I wanted. And that's how I got so damn big. And here, although the Portuguese, for them, a meal is a very social thing when they go out. Oh, this is another thing interesting about Portugal. when you go out to eat in the evening and you have a reservation, that table is yours for the night. There's no one rushing you out for the next customer. And that doesn't mean they eat for those 3 hours, but they eat properly. And
Yeah, we could go to a cafe and have 1 cup of coffee or 1 glass of wine and sit there for hours chatting to friends. Last time we were back in the States, I was so annoyed by the wait staff, that wanted us to eat and get out of there. We were visiting our kids. We just wanted to sit and chat. You can't do that there. You can here. No one cares. A typical lunch here goes 2 to 3 hours and includes wine.
But you're talking, our town of Tavira, I believe, is the representative of the Mediterranean diet.
Yeah, it's the Portuguese representative community for the Mediterranean diet. It has to do with the history here, plus the food consumption. And they do eat a lot of fish. We weren't real big fans of their fish, even when we're eating it, because like Panama, it comes whole. It has eyes. It has a tail.
That bothers her.
I'm a lazy American. I wanted a fillet. So when we went vegan, vegetarian, it worked for us, and it's an easy way to eat.
Yeah, you were telling a story, Clyde. Did you want to finish that?
Well, not really. I was just describing the food here is wonderful. Oh, yes. Eat to live and not live to eat. And that has been something that we've been battling our entire lives. Even after we both had weight loss surgery. Let me add that. And when you have weight loss surgery, you also have counseling, because they fix your tummy and give you a shortcut to losing the weight, but they don't fix the head. So it takes many years to fix the head. And right now we're at a point where our heads are fixed as far as food is. We're in control of what we eat. And I think being around in a country like this makes it a heck of a lot easier.
But we still love food, especially sweets. We tend to not buy the sweets and bring them in the house. It's easier to eat a sweet at a cafe, have one and be done with it, instead of buying the whole cake.
Terry and Clyde, you're both, I don't know if the word senior citizen is the right word, but you're kind of in that,
I think
in the ballpark.
I'm an old fart.
Senior citizen, old fart, whatever we want to call it. But you both, are still relatively young in that age bracket. I mean, where do you see yourself in the next 10, 20 years? What's the plan? Are we going to be rolling in Portugal and house sitting in 10 years, 15, 20 years?
Who knows?
Who knows? There's still a lot of places we haven't been in the world that I'd like to see. So.
Yeah.
And if we can defray costs by finding a house sit when we go, all the better.
Yeah, and that's what's ideal. She mentioned we did New Year's Eve in Vienna last year. The summer before last.
Spent 2 months on the outskirts of Paris. In this big, gorgeous house they were renting for like 5,000 euros a month.
And I got to tell you our Paris story. Now, we don't speak French. We don't understand much French. But we were walking the dog, and these yellow signs popped up on the light poles. And we're looking at them, trying to read them, and we were going to get our phones out to try to figure out what they said. And I saw Tour de France. The Tour de France came down our street while we were house sitting in Paris.
We put chairs out, opened a bottle of wine, had the dog, and there he went.
Was that a bottle of champagne?
No, it was just wine. Cheap wine. And the other thing, wine is very cheap here. It's cheaper than buying water.
What we didn't know, before the guys come by in the Tour de France, this arcade of vendors come by, and they're handing out free things like hats and T-shirts and candies. And so that takes about 45 minutes. So you stand there waving to them, and you get the free things. And then you wait about an hour, and the guys come by in 30 seconds. And,
Zoom, 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 zoom.
But it was fun. We were in the right place at the right time again.
Yeah.
We were house sitting in Lisbon last summer, and the Pope was in Lisbon for World Youth Day. Last World Youth Day, he was in Panama. I think, okay, let's go to the park. We're going to see the Pope go by. So we did.
Yeah.
Not much, but we saw him from a distance.
So, yeah, we're in awe of ourselves, and we have to pinch ourselves every once in a while. And part of that is finding each other in the second part of our lives. And we saved each other's lives from where we were before. Things were not good. And know that it doesn't have anything to do with the travel and the moving overseas. And that's another thing. We get along pretty darn good. We're always together.
Once you retire, you're together all the time. And what you said about had we retired in the U.S., and I thought about that same thing. Had we retired in Corpus Christi, Texas, and stayed there, what would we do? Our friends were still working. So by moving to Panama, it forced us to come out of our comfort zones, to make new friends, to create a new life.
I lived abroad for years and traveled extensively, and you really have to be a problem solver because you're always going to run into issues. And for people that want the cookie cutter, like the people that go to the all-inclusive resort, that type of, like, you're not going to find that. There's a certain type of a person that this really calls to, and other people, they're just going to be miserable.
Yeah, I think so. And that is something we did have to learn too, was we're kind of, I mean, there's a few really bad things can always happen no matter where you're at. But, let's say you're broke down in the middle of nowhere in a rent car. Well, there's not a whole lot of people still out there that broke down in a rent car. Things happen and things work out some way, somehow. Might cost you money, but you're going to be okay.
And I thought that when he was hospitalized in Spain. What if he dies here? What am I going to do?
Yeah.
And we had house sits booked for the next 6 months. I'm saying to the one nurse that spoke English, can we travel after this? She said, sure, he'll be fine. Once he recovers for a few weeks, you can go on with your travels. Okay. But yeah, it can be scary. We've splurged on a few all-inclusive resorts here and there, and they're boring. After the first day of sitting there, it's like, okay, what else do we do?
Yeah.
We keep eating. We're just laying around doing nothing. It is boring.
Has this taught you anything about, do you have any regrets from when you're younger? Has this lifestyle now made you wish that you would have done things differently when you were, say, my age?
Well, I've got to say something. I was a firefighter and a paramedic for 30 years. And I was born to do this job. And I love this job. But it's a job, when you do get out of it, you're damaged physically and mentally. It's a tough job. And there's a lot of jobs like this, whether you're a police officer, doctor, or a nurse, and you see all the bad stuff. But I wouldn't have changed it. That's just who I am.
Well, I wish I knew back then what I know now.
Yeah.
You don't have to be rich to travel. There are ways to do it. But like I said, I got pregnant young. And do you have children? No?
No.
That's why you can travel, because they take all your money and time. People that start out with kids don't tend to have the money, or the time to travel. And Americans don't get a lot of vacation. Him being a firefighter did. I never did.
Yeah.
Working at other jobs.
So I had a lot of time off, but I had other jobs.
Yeah.
And I always had a little business on the side. I did upholstery and cabinet making and stuff like that.
So yeah, life got in our way, or in me anyway. I mean, I never really wanted a baby. It just happened. So, you go with the flow and your path of life changes. I wanted a career. It didn't go in that direction.
She get a firefighter instead.
So, Terry, you're the author of the book Rescued and Transformed. Find out how I lost half my body weight, retired early to Panama, traveled the world inexpensively, and now live in Portugal. What's the biggest lesson that someone would take away from this book?
I think first I want to say that subtitle is so long because he was trying to get all the words in to have them come up on the searches. And that's why we put so much in there. I think the biggest lesson I want people to get out of this is not to be afraid to say yes to whatever you want to do in life. You don't need to stay in that bad relationship or the bad job or the bad location. You can up and move. You can do anything you want.
So you were married for about 20-some years before you and Clyde got together. How much does the person you're married to impact your happiness?
Oh, definitely. A lot.
Well, and we don't like to talk about our exes or be negative about that. But Terry literally saved my life because along with the job and everything, I was on antidepressives and I was a mess. And mentally.
Yeah, my situation wasn't as bad as his. I was married to an accountant, so, financially I was taken care of. We didn't have a lot of money, but But, our life was kind of boring. He came home, he read a book, he ignored me, and I got online and found people to chat with. I always had platonic male friends, whether in work or just friendships, men that would look at me and say, hey, you lost 20 pounds, you look good. My husband didn't care when I lost 20 pounds or 50 pounds. So, yeah. So, he wasn't beating me. It wasn't a horrible life, but it just wasn't this wonderful romance.
Yeah. And I think the lesson learned, and I guess I'll go ahead and say this publicly, I was a child of divorce, and my father pretty much abandoned us when I was 7. So as I grew up, I said, I will never do that to my kids. And I had 3 kids, and I stuck by them, and I stayed in the relationship till they were in their 20s. And then I made my moves, and that I will never leave my kids was my mantra. I will never do that. So anyway, once I left them and they were in their 20s, they dumped me. They don't talk to me anymore.
Another thing that influenced my life that I start the book out with, I was raised by a very overpowering bitch of a mother who was very thin obsessed, and having a fat child was just not okay for her. So from a very early age, she was putting me on diets and taking me to doctors and getting me on diet pills. And she always told me no one will ever love you because you're fat. And so, I got married the first time fat. I met him when I was fat, so I disproved that. And then she lived in Florida. I was living in Texas when I had the weight loss surgery with you. So I didn't tell her I had gastric bypass until after I did it, and I lost the weight, and she didn't see me for, 6 months or so. When I finally went to visit her and showed up at the door, 120 pounds from being close to 300, she started screaming at me and saying, why'd you do that? You're too skinny now. I didn't want you to do this. I said, what a bitch. And then she said to me, you look better than I do now. Well, yeah, I'm 30 years younger. I should look better than you. And then, so she wasn't supportive of that either. And then the next year when I saw her, I had had the plastic surgery and I have breast implants. She outlived 4 husbands. So by that time she was with her last husband. It's Florida. She has a swimming pool. I put on a bikini. I've got these big new boobs. And she's like, oh, you can't go out looking like that. So now there was this jealousy issue. But to the day she died, she was thin obsessed. She died of lung cancer in her 80s. She was happy that she was, 80 pounds, and she never wanted to be fat. So that was another big underlying issue of my life. And I still, to this day, think I'm never thin enough. I'm never good enough, because there's that recurring thing in my head that says, you're not good enough, despite all of my successes.
Yeah, the people that hurt you the most are the people that are closest to you. And when you
yeah.
actually travel abroad and you get away from these kind of toxic relationships, you're able to reflect back, because when you're in it, you're too close to it. And, like with you, Clyde, you tried to do the right thing with the kids, but they don't understand what you're trying to do. And like, what is it? No good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah. And what happens in life, the abnormal becomes normal. And this is just the way we live, because that person is this way and I allow that person to be this way. And before you know it, this is normal. And then when you get away from it and you look back, that wasn't normal.
No, it wasn't normal at all.
Yeah. And I'm talking about many things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think what Terry says, to have the balls to say yes and finally do the right thing. And And this, decision making in all adults is kind of rough. You sit there going, oh God, should I do this? What will happen if I do this? And I still have problems.
Portugal used to have one of the easiest residencies to get, and then as more people have flooded in, just the same thing with Panama, right? Like they used to have all these tax breaks, and all of a sudden, as more expats kind of flood in, they change the requirements, and all of a sudden now the deals aren't as good. How do you actually navigate this space? Because these incentives are there until they don't need them anymore.
Yeah. Well, and I've got to say this, and to be realistic, the real estate in Portugal is very expensive. Of course, we can't compare it to other real estate because we've been away from real estate. But yeah, houses are very expensive to buy here. And when they only finance up to the age of 70 years old. So if I walked into a bank, they go, sure, we'll finance you a house for 1 year. But but that's a thing that's worrisome throughout the whole world is prices of real estate and things going up and blah, blah, blah. And what happened to Portugal? Portugal was under a dictatorship until the mid 70s. And a lot of people left Portugal. And then as time went on and became a democratic country, the young people were still leaving because there weren't any good jobs. So that's when Portugal offered these tax incentives to get anybody to move in.
To get the Portuguese to come back.
And to get the Portuguese to come back.
They just raised minimum wage here. It was around $8.75. I think it's around $1,000 now.
A month.
A month. So the Portuguese are living on, $2,000 a month, if they have decent jobs.
Yeah.
We were talking to a nurse one day in a private hospital here, one of the better private hospitals. She's making $8.75 an hour. Do you know what a nurse makes in the U.S.? 50 an hour easily. I said, your English is very good. Maybe you want to consider. But so, wages are very low here. So it's a good place to come for retirees, but not the younger people. And there are a lot of younger people coming here with kids and looking for jobs, but they know they're not going to make much.
And one of the misconceptions of the American expats think that this place is flooded with Americans. Well, it's flooded with all kinds of people entering, all over the world. See, if you have let's say you have an Italian passport, with the Schengen agreement, you can just move to Portugal, register that you're living there, and become a resident. And so there's people coming from all over the place. And of course, where do they want to come? They want to come where the water is, where it's warm, and that's where we live.
This is the warmest part of the country, and it's actually one of the warmest places in Europe, here or southern Spain. So you were asking us about the weather. I still miss the weather in Panama. I liked the hot, humid weather. Although when we were there, it did get old. My hair was always up. I was always sweating.
You had asked before about something to be careful of when moving to a foreign country, and that is location. And for instance, some people will tout that, oh gosh, you could rent for $300 or $400 in Portugal. Well, these are the areas that there are absolutely no expats in. This is farm areas out in the middle of nowhere. And although you could survive, it would be very difficult. And this is what we did before. We moved to an area with very few expats, very low rent, but it was old.
We had mold. Cold. We had mold on the walls. It was cold. Yeah.
So that is one little warning for people coming from the States to Europe, and maybe you've experienced this. You really need a decent place to live.
And I think people underestimate how long it will take them to learn the local language. They think, oh, I'll learn it in a few months and I'll integrate and, I'll have Portuguese friends, Panamanian friends. And, it doesn't work like that. It's hard to learn a language, especially for older people. Mm-hmm. It's a constant battle. And if you do move into a Portuguese community where no one speaks English, I'm sure you have a better chance of learning it, but there's stresses that go along with that of, not having anyone around that understands where you came from. Even the Brits we have as friends, they speak English, but they don't know what U.S. healthcare is like and some of the things we go through that they're not accustomed to. Yeah. So it is comforting to have Americans around, as friends because they know where we've come from.
And I know that it sounds bad, but it's culture. And, the different cultures. I'm sure from you were in South Korea?
Yeah, well, I lived abroad for over 5 years, but I was in South Korea. I was in South America, then Asia, Indonesia. I worked on holiday visa in Australia for a year. I worked on a cruise ship. I worked in Alaska. I worked in Hawaii. Done quite a bit of stuff.
But you know where we're coming from about the culture of different countries. I'm sure you've had very good friends. We had wonderful Panamanian friends, but their life was so much different than ours. Although we were friends, we weren't hanging out every day. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Since we did live in a Panamanian neighborhood, our Spanish teacher, Jasmine, who your parents probably know, she said to us, don't be friends with your neighbors. Talk to them from a distance. You can say hi, you can talk to them, but don't invite them into your house because then they see what you have. And, you're a target. for theft,
So
even though they were very nice.
And that was the culture of Panama.
Thank you for spending over an hour with us today. Unfortunately, we didn't have electricity today, so we started late. But Terry, you're the author of the book Rescued and Transformed, to find out how I lost half my body weight, retired early to Panama, traveled the world inexpensively, and now live in Portugal. Tell us where people can find you, get a hold of you, get your book. And then also for both of you, for both Clyde and Terry, leave us with a final thought.
Well, first of all, let's talk about the book. The neat thing is if you go on Amazon.com and just type in Rescued and Transformed, the book will pop up and you could read the first chapter and just to get an idea about her writing. I'm pretty impressed with her writing. And, it's not that much money. You can get the Kindle version too. I've got the Kindle version. I keep on reading it. And I'll be in the gym reading the book and start crying because I remember, it's our lives.
So Amazon.com has the Kindle version, or for the Americans that want to buy it, Amazon in the rest of the world, like we order from Amazon Spain here. So wherever anyone lives, they can get it in paperback. And the paperback's done better than the Kindle version, to our surprise.
Yeah.
Because when we buy a book, we buy the Kindle version, but people want a book to hold. They can get hold of us. My same name, Terry Aber Coles, is my Facebook profile. They can message me through Facebook if they want to contact me.
So lessons learned, like we said, you got to say yes.
Uh-huh.
And
not be afraid.
To
jump into the unknown.
Yeah.
Might be surprisingly good.
Yeah. And exactly. That's exactly it. I've got to add to our Facebook friends, we are heroes because of what we've done. And they think we're rich, but we're not rich. We don't have any money.
Our old friends on Facebook take this once-in-a-lifetime trip to somewhere in Europe and, rave about it. It's like your retirement age. Why don't you just retire to Italy? Oh, we couldn't do that. And you can. A lot of people do.
Of course, we did it step by step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Panama was close to the U.S. It was a little easier than jumping over to Europe.
Wasn't quite as scary. And it is scary.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying it's not scary when you say yes.
And a lot of people do it as singles. I don't know that I would have done it as a single woman, but having a partner, it's just as crazy as you helps. But there are a lot of single women and men here that do it alone. Mm-hmm. Well, you interviewed Maureen, I know. We met her in Panama, and we knew her here. We see her from time to time, and she's this crazy single woman traveling the world.
My dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.